of the Norfolk coast has an infinitely changeable nature. The sea batters endlessly against the land, shaping the wide pebble beaches and changing the profile of the coastline, moving it further inland each year. During the last ice age, huge forces created these cliffs, but they're composed of soft glacial deposits which day by day crumble back into the sea. Visitors to this area will notice that the landscape changes with time. The coastal margins are a mixture of rich farmland and wide open salt marshes stretching as far as the eye can see, offering fabulous views and an extraordinary range of colour as the seasonal vegetation develops. Much of the coast has been designated an area of outstanding natural beauty, with many sites of special scientific interest and many conservation organisations working to preserve its unique character. Footpaths and tracks give access to some wild and wonderful places, and for those who enjoy more popular pursuits, there are wide beaches with safe bathing for traditional family holidays. Balanced between the needs of mankind and the power of the sea, this area is fragile and changeable. But this is what makes the Norfolk coast so special. Morston Marsh is a wild and wonderful area of saltings and tidal creeks. It's overlooked by the National Trust Information Centre. Taking just a few steps up to the observation gallery offers fabulous views over the marsh and across the Blakeney Channel to the old lifeboat house at Blakeney Point. And due east, over to Blakeney Church with its unusual second tower. The footpath follows the steep bank which forms part of Norfolk's fragile coastal sea defence. It divides two vastly contrasting landscapes. The seaward side is wild and wayward, constantly changing with the ravages of wind and weather, tide and time. The landward side, protected from the sea by just this slender bank, shows the man-made face of the Norfolk landscape, reclaimed from the sea centuries ago. Farming is perhaps the most important industry in Norfolk today, with a huge acreage under cultivation. Not so long ago, most of the population were employed on the land, but mechanisation has brought a radical change. The harvest fields, once alive with labourers and their families gathering in the crop, now show hardly a human face. Whilst the marshes, once empty except for a few local cockle gatherers, are now visited by townspeople who come to be refreshed amongst the wide open spaces. The fine organic material which forms the mud banks creates a rich food source for microorganisms. And so the food chain develops. As tiny mollusks and worms feed on the microorganisms, and these in turn form a rich supply of tasty treats for gulls and waders at low tide. Others can find entirely different delights in the mud, glorious mud. Pools and channels offer great sport at low tide. Fiddler crabs, which live in the mud, are an easy target for crab catching competitions, but must always be returned after the count. Pathways across the marsh lead through various margins of vegetation which can survive fairly regular immersion by seawater. In July, the marsh is swathed in blankets of sea lavender and the aromatic fronds of wormwood. In olden days, it was added to a concoction of ale, rum and spices, and said to give a wonderful appetite.
A glass before breakfast, that'll make a man eat bricks.
It's interesting to examine exactly how the salt marsh has been created and how it changes with time. At every tide, the waters carry with them a suspension of silt mud and sand. At slack water, the sediment lacks propulsion, drops to the bottom, and is left behind as the tide ebbs. So, with every tide, the salt marsh builds up. Samphire is the first plant to colonise the mud and helps to stabilise the bank by trapping yet more sediment. It's also a succulent treat when lightly boiled and served with butter. The action of the tides, whilst depositing sediment which builds up in the seaward side of the banks, also works to deepen the shallow channels which branch elaborately towards dry land. These draining creeks are created and maintained by the scouring action of the tides. In the older, more stable parts of the marsh, vegetation has been able to establish itself and grow across the creeks, blocking them off and creating extremely salty pools. At the outer edge, there's a distinct change in the vegetation as the muddy base gives way to sand and shingle. Here the ground warms up quickly in the sun, so plants can only survive in small hollows of shade or moisture. Plants like samphire, sea blight and sea purslane are specially adapted to retain moisture and survive these harsh conditions. At the extreme edge, only marram grass can survive by threading its roots wide and deep amongst the shifting sands. The outer mud banks support mussels, eelgrass and algae, which attract brent geese and oyster catchers, and of course local cottlers and bake diggers. Morston Marsh is just part of the 6,500 acres of the Norfolk coast owned by the National Trust. A fragile environment balanced between the hazards of natural erosion and human incursion. As the tide turns, new life fills the channels. All kinds of craft take to the water, and the local ferry boats fill up and head for Blakeney Point. At high tide, it's still just possible for small boats to reach Blakeney via Agar Creek. Blakeney has undergone radical change. During the reign of Elizabeth I, this was a busy seaport. Huge sailing ships would bring wine and raisins from the Mediterranean, and ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg and pepper from the Far East. There were regular passenger sailings to London, Newcastle and Hull. But by the 1870s, the last coal and grain ships had abandoned the port. This dramatic decline began in the 15th century, when the landowners wanted to create more grazing land. They embanked vast areas of the coast, keeping the sea at bay and radically changing the tidal flow so that the channels began to silt up. Large ships were eventually unable to reach the landing stages, and the port was left high and dry. But somehow, the spirit of Blakeney survived, due mainly to some far-sighted local residents.
John Wallace was one of the eccentrics of this world, lovely old man. And all the builders used to dump rubble from converting cottages in Blakeney and the locality on the quay. John used to get a wheelbarrow and fill it up and wheel it down and flatten it out and go back for another one. And he built that causeway that leads all the way alongside the channel right down to the end. And he made all that up by hand. He was a trained architect and he was nobody's fool, although he was an eccentric. What nobody realised was he obviously had money, and he had money left him in the family, and he used to buy cottages. When he died, he left, I think, 17 houses to the Blakeney Housing Society. It was started by an old lady in Blakeney who had obviously foresight, and she could see what was happening to the indigenous population, that the fact that they weren't being housed anymore because visitors were buying the property. She had a bit of money, and she bought a couple of cottages and formed the Housing Society. And they've been buying cottages and had cottages given to them by people like John ever since. They are specifically to be used for locals.
A stroll around the streets and hidden alleys reveals a fascinating hoard of delightful details.
A friend of mine in Blakeney who's a butcher, and I said, "Oh, Sid, how you doing, mate?" "Well," he said, "I don't know, it's a funny old world." I said, "What's the matter, boy?" "Well," he said, "a chap came to me," he said, just an hour ago, and said, could you tell me where Mr. Black lives?" "No, I couldn't." He said, "I didn't know who the hell he was talking about." And he said, he came back sometime later and said, "Oh, I found Mr. Black. And he lived exactly in the yard opposite my shop, and I didn't know." Now, he said, a few years ago that would have been unheard of. I would have known everybody in the street, but that just brought it home to me how things had changed.
But the new residents and tourists have opened up a whole new life for Blakeney. Winter visitors love the quiet expanses of marshland, and summer visitors enjoy a whole range of holiday delights. At high tide, the ferry boats carry eager groups of passengers to Blakeney Point Nature Reserve, also owned by the National Trust. Here, breeding colonies of common seal and the odd grey seal can be observed on the shingle banks. And behind them, a cacophony of terns nesting amongst the shingle. Though it's vital not to disturb this area during the breeding season, the boats can cruise quite near the bank without affecting the wildlife. Seals are expert divers, and under the murky waters of the Wash, they use a combination of acute hearing, echolocation, and a sense of smell to search out a meal of fish or cockles or whelks. Some boats also land at Blakeney Point. This is one of the oldest nature reserves in Britain, and it's been managed by the National Trust since 1912. The old lifeboat station houses an information centre and tea room for the summer season. The sheltered interior supports the usual salt marsh vegetation, but the shingle banks, especially on the seaward edge, are colonised by a surprising range of plants. Sea campion has a distinctive low-growing habit. The tiny scarlet pimpernel needs a pure environment and is now quite rare. Sea holly, whose waxy leaves help it to conserve water. And the superb yellow-horned poppy, equally well adapted to the conditions. The 5-mile overland journey back to Blakeney can be quite strenuous, but it's full of interest and well worthwhile. Shallow marsh pools offer abundant food for a variety of waterfowl. And in spring, the shelduck pirouette during their delicate mating dance.
What would you be, you wide East Anglian sky, without a church to recognize you by? What centuries of faith in flint and stone wait in this watery landscape all alone? The varied Norfolk towers could also be a soothing sight to mariners at sea.
Nearby, the local Wildfowl Association has created a protected area which attracts an extraordinary range of birds. The normally shy shelduck can be viewed in close-up, and springtime activity is always fascinating. On the hillside beyond Blakeney, there was once a wealthy Carmelite priory, which owned and controlled much of the surrounding area. But all was abandoned and deserted during the Reformation. Today, this ancient hillside is quiet and peaceful, echoing only to the silent chimes of the delicate harebell. This historic landscape has changed little since the 15th century Dutch engineers reclaimed the land from the sea. Though over the centuries the waters have broken through many times, flooding the coastal margins, killing livestock and humans alike. Approaching Cley along the coastal paths makes one understand the endless battle of mankind against the power of the sea.
It happened, I believe, about 6 o'clock one winter's night, early February, I believe. It was a surge caused mainly by 3 or 4 days of northwesterly winds holding up a very large tide up north, and then the wind changing to a west-northwesterly direction, which pushed it down quickly. And that's really what caused the 53 flood. On a normal high tide, that would have been about 24-foot tide, and you reckon we were talking about something about 65, which meant that from sea level it rose at least 18 feet. There was a chap there by the name of George Massingham, and he actually was pushed up into the bedroom. The water kept coming up and up and up, and this happened within possibly 2 hours, I should think. When it came through the bedroom floors, he thought, well, this is no good, I'll have to put the kids up in the actual attic. So he broke the chair leg, I remember him telling me, and smashed the ceiling down and pushed his wife and two or three kids up into the roof, and it actually came halfway up the walls in the bedroom, which, looking across here to that top sash, it would have been roughly halfway up that window.
Today, Cley next the sea stands nearly a mile inland and seems to be a secure and bustling little village, especially lively in the tourist season. But memories of the recent past live on in local folklore.
There's one chap at Newgate just down the road here. He got cut off feeding his pigs. He spent the entire night up a tree. But the worst thing about it was that, apart from the cold, was the fact that the rats all swarmed up the tree with him, and he was terrified.
The desperate days of storm and flood are easily forgotten amongst the hollyhocks which thrive in the narrow alleys, known in the local dialect as lokes. St Margaret's Church at Cley is a truly magnificent building. Much of its outline dates from the 14th century, with beautiful filigree work battlements typical of the period, and great windows with ornate tracery. Before the Reformation, the interior would have been alive with vibrant colour, and some traces still remain. A royal master mason worked on many of these exuberant figures over 600 years ago. There's a lion delighted with a tasty bone, and a very worried St George embraced by an angry dragon. A lively medieval musician with pipe and drum. A miserable and deformed hunchback. A veritable feast of characters with which the preacher might illustrate his sermons.
Since the great days of international shipping, the local population has been drastically reduced. These coastal churches need wider financial support in order to maintain and preserve them for future generations. It would be a tragedy to see these glorious buildings disappear along with the sea which brought the trade and wealth which built these grand churches. And there was no more sea.
In the 14th century, the channel was wide and deep, filling the Glaven Valley between Cley and Wiverton. Known as the Glaven ports, they were once busier than London, with huge masted vessels sailing all over the world and local shipbuilders supplying warships to fight the Spanish Armada. But with land reclamation of the 15th century and the building of this narrow medieval bridge at Wiverton, everything changed. Today at Cley, all that remains of the harbour is this little channel. The old grain mill was ideally placed here for shipping its cargo by sea, but the last load sailed in 1876 and the reed beds began to take over. Phragmites reed is Britain's tallest native grass. It starts life as a jet-black spear, which grows into a vibrant purple in the spring, and then opens into a sparkling silver seed during the summer. Winter brings a copper-gold colour to the reeds, and they will soon be ready for cutting. Reed cutting usually takes 2 or 3 months, and for the rest of the year, cockle gathering or bait digging supplement the marshman's income. But what makes a good reed for cutting?
They've got tall and straight really is what they're looking for, and that is a particularly good reed bed, you know, the one that I've been cutting.
Reed cutters usually work alone, except in unusual circumstances when everybody comes along to help out.
It's hard work, but, you know, we don't mind that. It's usually take me 2 months to do it on my own. I did it on my own, without any help. It took a day and a half to do what usually take me 2 months to do. I love doing it. I don't mind being down there on my own. be there all day and not see anybody. Didn't bother me at all. That's all used for thatching, all of it now. I've been told it take about 1,000 bundles on average sized house, and the amount that was cut the other day, probably just do over 2 houses, that's all.
Nowadays, the sea is nearly a mile away from the village, and the old Coast Guard station has been transformed into an observation point and cafe, attracting bird watchers from all over the world. Affectionately known as twitchers, these avid enthusiasts wait along the shoreline for the first sign of any unusual species. The shingle bank acts as a flood defence barrier, but constant erosion moves it landward by nearly a metre each year. Locals know the best time and tide for catching flatfish or codling off the beach, whilst others find their own enjoyment amongst this wide, active and energising environment. Though walking on the shingle can be quite hard going. Behind the shingle bank is perhaps one of the most important bird reserves in Britain, with many unusual and endangered species. The land was purchased in 1926 and has been under the watchful eye of the Norfolk Wildlife Trust ever since. Walkways and hides have been constructed to give easy access for visitors, and the specially made pools and scrapes are carefully managed to attract a huge variety of birds throughout the year. There's the elegant snipe with its distinctive long beak, and the red shank with its black-tipped beak. Brent geese feed on grass, seeds and lichen, stopping off here during their winter migration to the breeding grounds of the Arctic tundra. As evening falls, the magic of the marsh takes over. The preservation and conservation work of the Norfolk Wildlife Trust is ongoing and dedicated, creating a superb natural environment for birds and for bird watchers. Wildflowers and luscious grass thrive on the uncultivated grazing marsh which borders the road to Salthouse. Here the flint-faced houses are built to withstand the wind and weather, yet even the tiniest cracks can support the searching roots of red valerian, which also bears white flowers. At Salthouse, a few locals still make some sort of living from the sea.
Crabs look nice. Are they local?
Yeah, of course they are.
Centuries ago, this was a large port famous for its trade in sea salt. Today, all that remains of the harbour is this roadside pool, popular with birdwatchers. Local species mix happily with the migrants. The Egyptian goose is now largely naturalised here. The barnacle goose, feeding up for its 1,000-mile flight northwards. The grey lag goose, now a common Norfolk resident. Salthouse boasts another magnificent coastal church. Set on high ground above the village, it's been a refuge from flood and storm throughout its history. And higher still, Salthouse Heath, heady with the scent of gorse and wild honeysuckle. And other typical heathland species like ling and bellheather, bramble, fern and foxgloves, all thriving on the ancient glacial moraine which creates this high ridge stretching from Holt to Cromer. The road follows the route of the ancient coastline until it reaches Kelling, a pretty little place which still supports a village school, and the old public reading room, now a bookshop, gallery and tea room. Here a tiny lane winds gently downhill, bordered with scented dog roses and low-growing chamomile, which attracts the pretty common blue butterflies. And just to the right, there's a shallow pool, particularly attractive to nesting avocets. Their curved beaks, perfectly designed for searching through the shallow water and mud for insects, crustaceans and tiny molluscs. Wartime brought a strategic importance to East Anglia. An anti-aircraft gun training unit was set up on the coast at Muckleborough, and here the past is never far away. Now the coastal path edges along a perilous cliff-top route with wide open views and plant life especially adapted to the harsh conditions. Sea bindweed creeps low to the ground to survive the beating winds. Scabious seeks shelter along the moist field margins. Sea aster and sea pinks thrive in this salty environment. Ragwort roots deeply in the search for moisture. Bladder campion and the tall seed heads of sea beet or wild spinach border the pathway as it skirts along the cliff edge. The Coast Guard cottages at Weyburn show the full impact of cliff erosion as part of the garden has crashed into the sea. There's still a small crab fishing fleet here, and there's usually something interesting to watch down by the sea. But beware, the steeply shelving beaches at Cley, Salthouse and Weyburn can create a strong undertow, making it dangerous for inexperienced swimmers. Here the coastal erosion is rapid and radical. Already the footpath shows gaping holes, and the soft, sandy banks are splitting further apart with each rainfall or heavy storm. Weyburn Village is quite lively with a growing population clustered around the parish church. The handsome tower was built in the 15th century, as was the porch with its fine checkerboard facade and upper chamber used as a chapel. The church is built onto a 13th century Augustinian priory, which now stands in ruins. A mile or so inland, traces of another lost civilization can be found. The North Norfolk Railway has resurrected the age of steam by reopening the line from Holt to Sheringham, stopping at Weyburn. Beautifully restored diesel and steam locomotives run a regular and reliable service operated by a team of dedicated enthusiasts. Nearby, a completely different experience at Sheringham Park, laid out by Humphrey Repton around 1815. He created a series of spectacular viewpoints, and there's a glorious canopy of rhododendrons gathered from all over the world. A viewing platform offers fabulous views to the coastguard cottages and the mill at Weyburn. And as a rushing steam train bustles toward Sheringham, we could almost be lost in time. Just before Sheringham, we find Norfolk Coast Watch.
Norfolk Coast Watch is all about what the Coast Guards was all about before the government closed the smaller Coast Guards down in 1993. And then gradually a body of people got together and it's gradually spreading around the country. Already Coast Watch have saved lives.
Could be the first link in the chain.
Well, basically...
Because if there's an emergency out there, you start the ball rolling, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Down the chain.
Yeah, who's going to call out anything from that matter? They will rely, basically speaking, on what the public see when they're walking about or whatever they're doing. That's what they were relying on. We thought that the maritime service, plus the people that use the beaches, deserved something better. They deserved to be looked after whilst they were about. If they got a problem, we then able to report it to the Coast Guard.
We are keeping watch over the coast, the sea, and even people on land. One day you're going to save a life, and that is all going to be worthwhile.
Manned by volunteers and funded entirely by voluntary contributions, this is a professional organisation. Trained watchkeepers also keep an eye out for oil spills or chemical drums washed ashore. Norfolk Coast Watch has a vital role to play in the protection of this beautiful coastline. At Sheringham, the boating lake is a popular attraction with many special events during the summer. The RNLI operate an offshore lifeboat service here, maintaining a tradition going back to 1867. Sheringham is perched between two steep hillsides and became a popular holiday destination with the coming of the railways in 1887, and by 1907 trains travelled direct from Liverpool Street in about 3 hours. Of course, the great attraction is the beach. The grey beach pebbles are formed from glacial silica, which could be used in the pottery industry at Stoke-on-Trent. So flint picking became a valuable source of extra income for local families. But many felt that removing tons of pebbles each year would undermine the sea defences, so the industry was stopped. After the winter storms, work on the sea defences must begin. The groins, which fan out across the beach, are designed to break up the force of the waves and so prevent the beach from being washed away. Each year great baulks of timber must be replaced, and recently huge granite blocks have been added to give extra protection. The beach pebbles are surprisingly uniform in size and colour, and have for centuries been used as a local building material. Their bricks are needed to form straight edges. They were a wonderful free resource for the poor fishermen and their families, who often had to build their own houses. These non-porous, highly durable and weatherproof cottages make up the old part of Sheringham, clustered mainly around the low seafront and often arranged in neat yards and alleys, huddling together for protection from the elements. The museum is housed in one of these traditional rows. It offers a unique insight to the past, when Sheringham supported more than 100 fishing boats and whelking was a big industry. Boiling coppers would belch thick black smoke over the houses, and catches would be sent to London and the Midlands. Nowadays, the sea can only offer a sparse living. Yet it's surprising how the old traditions live on. The old rowing lifeboat, which served the town for many decades and rescued hundreds of mariners, is gracefully retired in its original boat shed. Now over 100 years old, this vessel is a testament to the skill of the local boat builders. With its predecessor, the Augusta, the lifeboats give their name to a nearby pub. Sheringham developed a completely different side to its character during the 20s, when genteel new attractions and guest houses were developed to cater for the growing tourist industry. Looking over the town, we can see how it's developed in a narrow gully between two steep hills. To the east, Beeston Hill, and looking back, Skelding Hill with its Coast Watch viewpoint. These steep cliffs were formed in the last ice age, when the glaciers heaved and sculpted the landscape as they melted and retreated from the land. The top layer of the glacial deposit comprises soft marine sediment and supports coastal flora, like the mallow, which flowers from June to September, and the welted thistle, ideally adapted to hot, dry conditions. Marram grass can survive in the most perilous places. The Ordnance Survey triangulation point marks the height as 63 metres above sea level, and the path continues steeply downhill to Beeston, the site of an ancient priory, now used by campers. And all that remains of the original village is this 12th century church. From here it's possible to walk through climbing heathland to the highest point in Norfolk, 105 metres above sea level. This area too is cared for by the National Trust. The coastline continues with steeply eroding cliffs, interrupted only by a tiny landing point at West Runton. Here, a few local boats still work the offshore banks for crabs and perhaps the odd lobster. The sea may reveal some more unusual treasures, including semi-precious stones like carnelian, jasper, amber or jet, and metal artefacts, perhaps lost long ago by Victorian holidaymakers. Who knows what might turn
It's
up?
got a nice hardness on it, and if it had been iron, I should have thought it had been well pitted by now. Yeah, that's bronze.
Wow.
That's a bronze fixture off of some boat or other.
Pools left by the retreating tide are always full of interest. The sea-weathered flints are particularly colourful. In the 1950s, the sculptor Henry Moore would walk these beaches searching for inspiration. Occasionally, the pebbles may reveal a hidden secret. Ammonite, a sea creature which lived millions of years ago, turned to stone. And belemnites, long extinct mollusks, which had tentacles rather like a squid. Cromer has been a popular seaside resort for more than 2 centuries.
1792, the Universal British Directory. Cromer has for some years past been a summer resort of much genteel company, on account, as well as of the beauty and pleasantness of the country about it, as of the air and the convenience of the place for bathing.
The baskets which mark the end of the groins make a handy lookout point for gulls, shag or cormorant, often to be seen holding out its wings to dry after deep diving for eels or fish. The cliff top is fringed with sea buckthorn, a tenacious shrub with deep spreading roots which help to stabilise the cliff. Its berries are particularly attractive to the missel thrush. The western side of Cromer was developed around the 1900s to provide the guest houses and accommodation needed by the influx of tourists brought by the railways. Ugly caravan developments followed. But tourists are the lifeblood of Cromer, and the town has developed to meet their needs. The pier was opened in 1901, replacing a storm-damaged jetty. A traditional English seaside feature, this is one of the last few remaining piers. For nearly 100 years, this elegant cast-iron structure has been the focus of the town, with glorious views in every direction. It also supports the Edwardian Pavilion Theatre, home to the last of the end of the pier shows. A lifeboat house was added in 1923, but for this, time has moved on. A new building has been erected to house the latest in life-saving equipment and a new lifeboat, confirming Cromer's position as a frontline station on the east coast. At the foot of the old gangway, there's a much earlier lifeboat house, now a fascinating little museum, named after Cromer's most famous lifeboatman, Henry Blogg.
He used his knowledge and common sense to get a job done, which really is basically what lifeboats are about. He was in the right place at the right time. The lifeboat we're actually standing on now was the wartime, should we say, mount of Henry Blogg. the H.F. Bailey. It was here from 1935 to 1945 and saved over 500 lives while it was here, under the command of Henry Blogg.
Blogg was cox for over 50 years and was awarded the George Cross and the British Empire Medal for his bravery. But every crew member in the lifeboat service faces these dangerous seas, and each carries out his duties with skill and professionalism.
The H.F. Bailey is 46 foot 9 inches long, and on one rescue it brought back 101 survivors, plus the 12 crew.
This coast is notorious for its ferocious seas and the lack of sheltered ports. Thousands of ships have been wrecked here, and the sailors who regularly plied the route from London to Newcastle named this coast the Devil's Throat.
Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep its own appointed limits keep. O hear us when we cry to thee, for those in peril on the sea.
Anybody can become a lifeboatman. The old tradition was to be fishermen and seamen. But nowadays, especially with the more modern technology coming on, we have builders, solicitors, anybody from any walk of life can become a lifeboatman.
The volunteer crew can muster and launch in just a few minutes, ready for any emergency. The Royal National Lifeboat Institution is a charitable organisation. It relies entirely on public donations to keep the service up to date and running efficiently. Cromer is rightfully famous for its crabs, the sturdy two-man boats set out in all seas to lay their shanks of pots and return the next day to haul in the catch. For most it's a family business, going back many generations. The crabs are freshly boiled, expertly picked and dressed, and into the local shops within hours of leaving the seabed. Delicious in a crab salad sandwich, or served with new potatoes, lashings of butter, lemon and freshly ground pepper. Cromer Museum is a hidden treasure trove, tucked away in a row of old fishermen's cottages. It's packed with information on ecology, geology, flora and fauna, birds, sea life, and the lives of seafarers and their families.
The Norfolk coast is less dramatic than some, but nevertheless it has its dangers and its fascinations. The fishing industry can be traced back for centuries. The fishermen used traditional double-ended boats, although most are now made of modern glass-reinforced plastic rather than wood. They launched off the beach to catch crabs in pots like these. The coast also holds two particular geological treasures. Rapid erosion has been a problem for centuries, but it's also an opportunity for geologists. The dramatic crumbling cliffs are the remains of enormous glaciers from the last ice age. The contortions and thrusts displayed by the strata are a testimony to the great forces at work when glacial ice from as far as Scandinavia and Scotland pushed its way into Norfolk. Today, we can find ample evidence of rocks from the Oslo region carried here by moving ice. From the time before those glaciers, we have sediments containing numerous fossils. As the coastline erodes, the bones of long extinct animals are washed out on the beaches. These fossils, from our most recent geological strata, tell us about the origins of the British fauna and flora. Not long ago, a very famous fossil has been recovered. Britain's oldest and most complete skeleton of an elephant has come from West Runton near Cromer. And this is just a cast of part of its backbone. The Museum Service has recovered the bones of an enormous male of a very early type of mammoth. He was 4 metres tall to his shoulder and weighed 9 or 10 tonnes, much larger than a modern elephant. Detailed scientific investigations at the site are teaching us a lot about what Norfolk was like 700,000 years ago.
And to bring things right up to date, there's an absolutely superb database of photographs, illustrations and historic documents available to anybody at just the click of a button. The church has an elegant and spacious interior, crowned by the tallest church tower in Norfolk. Standing 160 feet above the town, the views are absolutely spectacular. Looking over the eastern side of town, there's the distant lighthouse and the countryside which inspired the Victorian journalist Clement Scott.
August 1883. Below me, as I rested among the ferns of the lighthouse cliff, there they all were, digging in the sands, playing tennis, working, reading, flirting. This little society loved its band, its pier, its shingle and its sea. I could scarcely believe that I was only parted by a dip of the coastline from the music and laughter and seaside merriment. A blue sky without a cloud across it, a sea sparkling under a haze of heat, wild flowers in profusion, poppies everywhere.
The lost world of Poppyland and the Garden of Sleep is the starting point of our next programme, the final leg of our coastal journey from Overstrand to Great Yarmouth.